We we had our family in the interior room with no windows, two single mattresses put together. I had the crack, so four of us on two single mattresses, and I really couldn't sleep well anyway. But I just couldn't stop watching this thing. I mean, you're not supposed to stand by the window, I know, but and it looked like anything at any time could just come crashing in. But I was just amazed at the power of that storm, and I couldn't stop watching it. And I was also amazed at the ability for the trees to survive. It was just amazing that they were holding. We had one tree where a limb fell, and it fell into the street and then into our yard. And so we got up the next morning and looked at that, and Noah and I did some, I said, Noah, it's time to be a man, and gave him the lopper and some gloves, and he was out there, and I don't have a chainsaw, but I have a handsaw, and so I was going to be a man and saw that guy myself, you know. And I got one good cut, and but several more were needed. And this thing was sappy, and I was just not getting anywhere. So I'm sitting there, and here comes a car, and you know, there's debris everywhere, and it's kind of weaving through, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just thinking, this guy's looking at me like, who's this fool trying to cut this tree with a handsaw? So I'm just smiling and sawing, and yep, I'm the fool, here I am. And he stops and gets out of his car, goes to the back, opens it up, pulls out a chainsaw, and cuts up that log for me. And I even said, what's your name? Thank you so much, what's your name? And he just waved, and then got in his car, and the angel got back into his spaceship and flew away. You know, it is amazing how we were survivors. You know, the trees are survivors. We're survivors. How did we make it through that storm? How did so many there's devastating damage. I heard collapse along the way. And that one in the scripture, so they wouldn't collapse along the way. And that rang true for me. I thought, yeah, I think all of us this week were ready to collapse along the way at some point. But here we are, and we're survivors. I stood on Friday in front of the Monarch kids, and I was like, you have survived a hurricane. Chad Hudson checked on me to see how I was doing, and I said, well, now you're a Floridian. Welcome, you've passed your initiation. You know, you've been through something really intense, and you've survived. And so it's amazing. That's such an amazing gift that God has given us, this ability, and then the ability to join together and to say, here's what someone needs, and to arrive just at the right time to help someone else. People were coming out of their house. Nobody had power after the storm. And we actually met. There had been a couple that moved in, and they had young kids, and we had never really found a time to go over there with the Brownies and welcome them to the neighborhood. And so finally we got to meet them, and so that was nice. And then there's a house 2 or 3 doors down, and we finally got to meet those people. And we were like, so how long have you lived in that house? 14 years. How long have you guys? 16 years. You know, and now we're finally, I couldn't tell you before what they even look like. So Murray's like, come on, stop making fun of us. But we got, like the trees, we got blown around. And the trees looked a little beat up the next couple days, but a little calm and sunshine, and you realize that actually everything's starting to look like alive again and healthy, and it's actually it's got a purpose too. I mean, all the dead stuff gets pushed out, the cobwebs get blown out, and so we've been disturbed this week, and our hearts go out to those like Rosemary who doesn't have a roof, and it's going to be a really long recovery. But we're survivors, and it's just amazing. We're made in the image of God, and God is a survivor, and He has strength. And we have strength to survive and to care, to have compassion. Jesus looked upon this crowd and He had compassion on them. And so some of the good stuff, some of the image of God stuff comes out of us, comes out of all of us during these times, the survival and the compassion that we have for one another. So this passage in Mark is interesting because Mark is the shortest gospel, 16 chapters, as opposed to a long Luke, a long Matthew, and John that's completely different and longer. 16, very concise. It's the short gospel. Why would Mark have two mass feedings? We've already gone through one, where he fed the masses miraculously, where Jesus did that. Why would Mark include two? And so that's an interesting question, and that's what I was thinking about and also reading about. What are some of the theories on why exactly would Mark do this again? Because it's not Mark's style to repeat himself, to be long. And so what's interesting here is what's the movement in the gospel is that this feeding is to Gentiles. Remember a few weeks ago we studied when Jesus finally left. Jesus had left Galilee. He had left a couple times. Remember, he healed the demon-possessed man, and he put the demons in the pigs ran in the water, and the whole town freaked out and said, "Can you please leave?" And then he goes back over. And then he had gone up to Tyre and Sidon and kind of was just trying to keep his head down and probably tired, collapsed like us after caring for so many people and so many people coming to him. And there was a bit of him probably wanting to go away, but of course he's always on the job. He's always fulfilling God's call. And so the woman comes up to him and asks for her daughter to be healed, for him to heal her daughter who's demon-possessed. And he says what's a real head-scratcher to us. The children have to be satisfied. The children at the table have to be satisfied. And remember that word satisfied. It's the same word that we find in this feeding. The children need to be satisfied first before the dogs can be given the bread. And we think, why would he say that to that woman? And so that was the beginning of him reaching out to the Gentiles. And then, of course, she said, well, the dogs will eat the crumbs from underneath the table. And Jesus just loved that response and said, for that response, go, and you will find your daughter healed. And so what we see is this opening up to the Gentiles, and I think that's where Mark's going, because then he has Jesus come back, start to head back, but he's still in Gentile territory, and he heals a man who is deaf and mute. So he heals a Gentile man that's brought to him, and he was healing other people as well. But Mark doesn't waste any words, and so this is, you see, he doesn't keep healing the same thing. He heals something new here. He's going to mention a healing that's different, and so this is the first deaf and mute person that's healed, and then that's a Gentile. And so then he's still in Gentile territory, and then he has compassion upon these people, and he has this mass healing, this mass feeding, and until they were all satisfied. And so you see this movement of inclusion in Mark. So that's what we're getting. Everyone's included, and I talked about Irma. The name means universal, and last week we had our little service on Saturday before the storm, something that I think we'll remember. And it's one of the things about a storm is we're all in the same boat. Some people flee away and they kind of get away from it a little bit. A fraternity brother from Miami flew to Denver, and he's been hounding us with pictures of beautiful Denver. And here, I'm in my office, and he's in Starbucks in Denver with the mountains in the background. We're like, thank you very much. He's checked out. But the rest of us have, this kind of universal experience. It's inclusive. It's why we're connected with our neighbors, because we're all going through the same thing. It's this shared experience. So there's this inclusiveness. We're all in this together. There's no boundaries. Those have been, the fences between us have been blown down. And so this is what's going on in Mark. Mark is showing this inclusion. And so even though it sounded harsh at first about Jesus, is he calling her a dog? Well, he's showing her that was the mentality at the time. That, listen, only the children are allowed at the table where the bread of God is. Only the Israelites get the blessing. The old covenant, the law, it's for the Israelites. It's for them. Everyone else doesn't really belong at the table. They're like a dog that really doesn't belong sitting at the table. Dogs aren't supposed to eat from the table, from the plate. They're different. Okay, not to say that they're bad or not part of the not part of what's the house, but so there's this movement of inclusion that Mark is showing us, and we see the same thing in this story in our Jacob and Joseph story. We have Jacob now. Remember Jacob. This is probably the big tension in the story of Joseph. Now that the family's reconciled, there's still more story to go. Why? Roll the credits once everyone's back together. Yay! Roll the credits. We're done with the story. Well, no, there's still this idea of who's going to be the next patriarch. Who is Jacob going to pass it on to? How is he going to resolve everything? And that's really the tension that's taking place. That's the reason for more story here. And so how is he going to approach that? Because before, what happens, we see in the history of the patriarchs, what we see is that blessing, that covenant, only goes through one person, and then the rest, brothers, half-brothers, nephews, they're out. They actually become other nations. Remember, Lot comes in with Abraham, Lot, his nephew, but then Lot, they have to separate, and Lot then becomes the nation of Ammon and the nation of Moab. Ishmael is a half-brother. He has to be separated while he becomes the Arab nations to the south. And then we have Esau and Jacob. So Jacob and his brother are here, and they're even twins. And so Esau has to be disconnected. And so this blessing of God then goes through only one. It goes through Jacob, and Esau then becomes the nation of Edom. And so you see these, and it's interesting because you see later on, when they go into the promised land, there's all these other nations. Well, they're all a lot of them are connected back to Abraham. But only that blessing goes through the one. And so what's Jacob going to do? Who's he going to choose? And it looked like Joseph, of course, at first. And now he's reunited with Joseph. So what's he going to do? Well, Joseph comes to him. It's the end of Jacob's life. He's been 17 years in Egypt. It wasn't like he was just in Egypt for a couple months on a visit or moved down there and died. 17 years he was in Egypt, Jacob was. Joseph's been there a long time. Jacob, 17 years he's down there. And so who's he going to choose? So Joseph hears that it's time to say goodbye. And so he goes and visits, and he brings his two sons. And what does Jacob do? He takes Ephraim and Manasseh. Here are two sons that are Egyptian. 17 years, that means these guys are in their 20s. They're visiting weird new grandpa here. It's like they've had this other grandpa, and actually their other grandpa in Egypt we're told he was a priest of the sun god of Egypt. That's what they knew. And of course, Jacob probably along the way was saying, okay, guys, we're really worshiping this God, and we're really worshiping Yahweh, the God of Israel. But that's what they were used to. That was their grandfather. Their mother was Egyptian. And so, easily they can, okay, those guys aren't going to be included, right? They're essentially Egyptians. And so what happens? Where weird new grandpa, who they haven't known for, just kind of shows up. Well, they've known for the 17 years, but he says, these two belong to me. And he blesses them, and he includes them. He says, these now become Joseph. I am taking your spot, and I am taking these two and putting them in your place. They belong to me. If you have any other kids, they're yours. But these two are mine, and they're included. And it's interesting to help you with the math, there's the 12 sons. So Joseph is taken out and replaced by 2, which would make 13. But then remember, Levi is kind of like this Washington, D.C. status, where it's like not considered one of the 12, but it's in there. So there's actually 13 tribes in Israel, but Levi was not given a land because they were the priests. And so Ephraim and Manasseh become one of the 12 tribes of Israel. They take Joseph's place. So all to say is they're included. And that's really amazing. And that's, maybe that's certainly God's plan, and it's something that probably Jacob learned. He's thinking, isn't it a shame that Esau is another nation? Isn't it a shame that this has to be broken apart, that I have to choose one son? Isn't that a shame? Shouldn't I be more inclusive? And so we see in the Gospel of Mark, we see inclusion. And then we see inclusion here in Genesis. And the application for us is we're included. We matter. We get into regular routine, and some people drive fancier cars than others, and other people have this job and that job, and we start to kind of separate. Then a storm comes and blows everybody down, and we're all at the same level. We're all included. It's kind of like when your power goes out and then it comes back. That sensation of, yes, I'm included. I had a neighbor. I'm one of the elite. I had a neighbor who, because that's pretty much all you care about. I mean, we now, we went from all blown down to the same level, and then we had a 2-class system: those with power and those without. That was the simplified caste system. I had a friend in the neighborhood tell me that his side of the street didn't have power. He lives on one of the, and then he's sitting in his hot living room, and he looks across, and his neighbors across the way are sitting in air conditioning, deciding which Netflix they're going to watch. It's just it's just classic. And so if you're still without power, what I can tell you is eventually you will have power. And at that moment, you will have this sensation of, I'm included. Yay! I'm part of the elite class. I've gone from serfdom to now air conditioning. I'm like a god. I've gone from, So there's this, that is, it's all to say, you're included. I think sometimes we forget this. Father Abraham is our father in faith. We are included in this story. Jesus has included us. And I was reading, couldn't be any better reading last night. In my reading through the Bible, I was reading Ephesians. In his body, he has taken the dividing wall and destroyed it. He has unified us. We all belong. We are all children of God. We are all belong at that table because of what Jesus has done, because of his sacrifice that he has made us. We are included in God's blessing. And it was a great line when it's interesting. Jacob says, "Who are these?" And he points to Ephraim and Manasseh. Who are these whippersnappers? And he already knows who they are. He already has said their names. He said Ephraim and Manasseh are mine. And then they have this discussion, and then he's like, "Well, who are these?" And it's almost to say, kind of, okay, give me a description of who they are. You know, it's kind of an old man going, "Now, who are you?" Just to kind of like, he knows who you are. He might not remember your name, but he kind of wants to get into that perspective. And so Joseph picks up on it perfectly. He says, "These are the children God has given me." And it's really a great line, because it's the exact same line that, remember when Jacob was returning to the promised land and he hears that Esau is coming to meet him, the brother that he had tricked, and he had tricked the blessing. And so here comes Esau, and he's even got an army with him. He's got like 400 men, and he's coming. And so Jacob starts sending all these gifts and people, and so he sends Leah and those sons, and then his next wife and those sons, and so on, and finally Rachel. And Esau says to Jacob when they finally meet, "Who are these? You know, who are all these? Where did all these people come from?" And he says that exact line. These are the children that God has given me. And so this is the blessing that God has given me. We can all look back at our life, whether we have children or not. This is the life that God has given me. These are the blessings that God has given me. These are the relationships that God has given me. During the storm, you find yourself doing funny things because you don't have power or internet or anything, and so Murray ended up cleaning out closets. You know, did anyone else clean out closets? Things that things that you normally wouldn't do, you end up doing because you're like, okay, I can't really drive anywhere. I can't turn on anything. My routine has gone off, and so she ends up in the photo albums, and she spends most of a day going through her whole life that she had so beautifully documented over the years. We don't do the hard copy photos. We've got digital photo albums, so that's okay. But here she is, going through the pages, and she would call me every once in a while. And of course, we've known each other since we were 20 years old. So I know most of it. I know her high school friends and all this stuff, and we're making fun of their hair. And Murray had really big hair in the 80s, big, curly blonde. It was like bigger than her. His little legs sticking out from big. And it was the 80s. What are you going to do? But she kind of had this it was almost this moment, which, good timing. We're right at the midlife point, 45. This is the life that God has given me. These are the blessings. These are the relationships. God's all part of this. And so to get to that perspective, and that's really where they were, and saying, these are the children God has given me. And that's what kind of Jacob in that last moment was trying to draw out. Can we have that perspective? This is the life that God has given me. What a blessing God has given me. So many people, relationships, joy, sorrow, the whole deal. This is the life that God has given me. We're included in God's blessing of the life that He has given us and the bread of life. I've been wondering why so much bread in Mark. And it was interesting because we were going through the whole grain thing in Joseph. So we kept on having like grain. They're dealing with grain, and then Joseph's storing away grain, and then the disciples are eating grain with their unwashed hands. And the Pharisees say, "You can't do that. Don't do that." And there's all this bread. There's 2 feedings. He's saying, "Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees." And they're like, "Oh, did we forget bread? It's not about the bread. It's about the real." Why is there so much bread? Why does that keep coming up? And so in thinking about it, Jesus is preparing. Why have 2 mass feedings? In this one, I don't know if you noticed, but the fish then kind of dropped off. It was like, and there was some fish in there. It wasn't, the bread was clearly the focus here. And so it don't you think Mark is preparing the disciples, preparing the readers for the table that they're going to sit down with Jesus? And he's going to take the bread and give thanks and say, "This is my body given for you." Isn't he preparing them for that blessing? Isn't that where it's all pointing? That this blessing is given to us, the bread of life. And he doesn't use the bread of life, but certainly John, if we want to do bread, we can go to John. And Jesus stands up and says, "I am the bread of life. I'm the manna that comes down that God has given." This is the blessing. We're included in the most amazing blessing in the entire history of the world. Not just making it through a hurricane, but from creation till the end of the world and its renewal in heaven comes to earth, we are part of the blessing that Jesus has given us, the bread of life, his body, his sacrifice for us, the new covenant. Not the old covenant that was limited to, well, you're not part of the table. No, through Jesus, we're all invited to the table. We all have a place. You have a place at the table. You are included. Jesus has included you, and he has made the sacrifice to give us the bread of life, to give us forgiveness, to give us his Spirit. You are included in God's blessing. So, be satisfied. Be satisfied. I think we're, as much as, it's crazy, the more we have and the quicker we have it, the less satisfied we are. Isn't it amazing? We need this almost every once in a while. We need for everything to be blown down and for us to say, okay, what really matters? Is it me being able to order something online and it to show up immediately? Is that what happiness is? And so let us be satisfied. This is the bread of life. This is what can satisfy us. And so we're constantly looking. And the more we have, and the quicker we have it, the less satisfied that satisfaction is still not there. And so Jesus he had compassion on them and fed them, and they were all satisfied. Be satisfied. And there was an abundance. Jesus gives us an abundance. We're so blessed. We're included in the table of God's blessing of the new covenant through Jesus. So be satisfied. I like Genesis 48:11. Here's Jacob. He is really he's in the zone here. I mean, he's at the end of his life, and this is the way you want to end it. When you're in this kind of perspective, and he's about to bless all the sons, they all gather to him. This is the way you want to go. You've got all your family and you're blessing them, but he's got this perspective of knowing that he's included, he's blessed, and he's so satisfied. And Israel says to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again. And now God has allowed me to see your children too. I mean, isn't that amazing? I didn't expect to see Michael. I didn't expect to play music with Michael Bloomer again, and here he is. You know, God's plan is so much beyond us. Let us be satisfied in that. That's where we find satisfaction. That's the perspective of life where we're happy. When we say, this is the blessings that God has given me. Praise be to God. He's included me. I'm included in the table, the family of God. Jesus has done it for me. I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too. God has given me more than I can possibly ever expect. So here we are, exhausted after this hurricane, but hopefully satisfied. And because we've been pushed into, which that's what it takes a lot of times for us, we've been pushed down and have to get up and say, what's really important? And then we see that what really is important is God's blessings upon us. And then we're satisfied in our hearts. Let's spend a few moments with the Lord.